Yo, what is going on, guys? Flashverse here, and welcome back to another video on The Flash Season 8, and this will be my review and breakdown for The Flash Season 8 Episode 4, titled Armageddon Part 4, and just wow, what an episode. This episode was so good. We got some answers in regards to this alternate timeline, which is now called Reverse Flashpoint, and we got the reveal in regards to how Thawne was able to execute everything according to plan and pretty much steal Barry's life and create this perfect world for him. We had some very well acted scenes. In particular, Grant Gustin, he killed it. One scene which really stood out for me was the one where he went to Damien Dark for the first time and then he acted as a villain. I really loved that. And then when he goes to confront Thawne as well, that was great. And then when he tries to talk down Iris and everything like that, all of that was just very well acted. And each character acted so well in this episode. It was honestly amazing. Damien Dark and Barry's interactions were also great. That's probably like the main element which carried the episode for me. This is by far the best we've ever seen Damien Dark in the Arrowverse, and I truly loved it. It was really great to see Damien Dark back, and it was great to see him work with Barry. Once again, as I said, Damien Dark and Barry's interactions in this episode was just so good. Thawne once again just continues to stand out. He's such a great villain. I love how he was just literally impersonating Barry while also showing traces of himself and being the more intelligent one as the team leader. Obviously, he's not Barry, but he's impersonating himself as the Flash, and I really loved it. He's acting as being this hero when in reality he isn't. He's the villain who's been pulling the strings all along, and the fact that he's acting as a hero is just so good. He's such a great villain, and I just love this character so much. And I love how he just, as I said, took Barry's life as the Flash and literally ripped everything away from him. This is exactly like how great of a villain Thawne is. The Iris and Ryan Wilder friendship was also something I really liked. They have such a great established friendship, and that is the case because this episode takes place 10 years in the future. But they had that great scene in the loft, which I really liked. And it just shows how great their friendship becomes, and I cannot wait to see more of this dynamic going forward in the Arrowverse. That last scene with Barry and Iris was very well done. I really loved it. It just felt very natural, and like, you know, how Barry lost everything, and when the timeline is restored, he just dives in and hugs her, and then he talks to Team Flash as well. I really loved it. This episode was really good, and I think it's one of the better episodes of Armageddon. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's probably like second place or something like that. That being said, however, I did have a couple of issues with the episode. One in particular which really frustrated me was the Allegra and Chester stuff. It was very useless and you didn't need that at all. And there was also another thing, but I want to get more in detail with that in my breakdown, which is why I'm not going to mention it in this intro. But yeah, for those who haven't seen the episode, then spoiler alert, because this is a review and breakdown after all, so I'll be going over some major spoilers which you certainly would want to hear from me. So if you haven't seen the episode, go watch the episode and come back later for this review and breakdown. But for those who are staying, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you are aware of more Arrowverse content coming your way. Okay, so this episode kicks off right before Barry walks into the room, before he even time travels to 2031 in the first place, and we find out that Ryan Wilder, aka Batwoman, and Sophie Moore have been together and they want to have a baby. So that, I guess, confirms that we are going to get Wildmore happening in Batwoman sometime soon. And we also found out that Frost and Chilblain are doing some business in the bathroom, which I will not go into. But Allegra now lives in London and she's potentially moving back to the US due to a job offer in Gotham City. So that was pretty interesting as well. We do see the ending scene from episode 3 in the perspective of Team Flash as well as Eobard Thawne, where obviously he takes Iris and then Barry ends up seeing it. So yeah, this episode, like, you know, really kicks off with Barry confronting Thawne and how he's been the one doing this all along. And Team Flash pretty much think he's crazy. Like, Iris said something along the lines of, "Get away from me, you psychopath," or something like that, or it was murderer. And then Team Flash are just staring at him like, what the heck is this guy doing? And Cecile also uses her powers and senses Barry, and she's just like, wait, he genuinely believes what he's saying is real. So it was a very well acted scene. I really loved it. And then Barry is just like, okay, I'm going to prove it to you. So he runs out and then he comes in, but the only thing that's different is that he puts on a reverse flash suit and his lightning is now red. It's not orange. So he's pretty much become the reverse flash. And obviously Barry questions what he's done. And I just love what Thawne does, where he's just like, you're not the Flash anymore. And then he goes in and then comes back in with the Flash suit and he's like, I'm the Flash. I absolutely loved that. It was such a great scene. And then we do have the new title card, which is essentially just Thawne replaces all of the Barry shots in the intro. But we then obviously have the Flash and the Reverse Flash facing off each other, in which Team Flash are obviously assisting Eobard Thawne at this point, and Barry's pretty much solo. We have Barry attempting to throw lightning at Thawne, and then Ryan Choi uses some atom tech to shrink Thawne to avoid the lightning blast, which I thought was pretty cool. Alex then uses her powers to essentially, slow Barry down, and then we find out that Barry cannot use his speed for a while, in which we then have Batwoman just flying at him, beating him up. Alex joins in, and then I really loved Allegra's takedown. Her powers are so cool visually, and this was certainly one of those scenes where it really stood out. But yeah, Barry's just pretty much getting destroyed by Team Flash. And one thing I find really interesting is that this Reverse Flash Barry has actually been responsible for killing Ray Palmer, Nate Haywood, Sarah Lance, and Cisco Ramon, which was very interesting. But we then have Barry running to the loft with Iris, and he essentially tries to convince her that he is the Flash, and Thawne has been basically manipulating the timeline to change everything. Obviously, Iris doesn't believe it at first, and then we have Barry bringing up that they have kids, Bart and Nora, and he says that she's his lightning rod because that phrase always seems to work, but however this time, it doesn't work. We then have Thawne rushing into the loft and he brings Barry to another location, and we get this really intense and very well acted scene between the two characters. We find out that Thawne created this timeline called Reverse Flashpoint, in which he's the one who caused the radiation scanner in Star Labs to go offline, which resulted to Star Labs being evacuated. We also find out that it was Thawne who's killed Joe at the train station, which obviously was predictable. We did predict that Thawne was the one who's done this. We do also know that Thawne was the one who attacked the city in episode 2 to make Barry look crazy. I did make theory videos on that explaining how this could have been Thawne, and it turns out that I was right. So that was pretty cool. And we find out that Thawne did this so he would essentially beg Jefferson Pierce to take his speed so he couldn't basically undo the timeline which Thawne has created. I just love how Thawne is so calculative over here. It's really great, and I just love how great of a villain Thawne is. And we also find out that Thawne's done this all because of what Barry did to him in episode 18. So if you're gonna hit Thawne, Thawne's gonna hit you even harder. That's pretty much the analogy we're going for over here. And we find out that the only way Thawne could defeat Barry is to essentially become him, which is why he wanted to be the Flash. So we find out that Thawne ran back to 2013, and he was the one to get struck by the particle accelerator explosion and get struck by that lightning. And he was the one who essentially Iris wrote about as the Streak, and he was the one who led Team Flash, and he was the one who Iris fell in love with, which, again, he basically stole Barry's life. And we also find out that Thawne killed Child Barry. So Nora Allen is not dead in this timeline. It's Child Barry who's dead. And he has until midnight until Barry is erased and the timeline solidifies. Now here's the issue, right? If Thawne was the one who got struck by lightning, how does Barry still have powers? Although the timeline didn't solidify yet, which they did explicitly say, a change that big should literally be rid of your speed right away. So I didn't really like how slow of an approach they took. And another thing is, if Barry as a child was killed by Thawne, how does he even become the Reverse Flash in the first place? That's another issue which I found. So yeah, I don't know if I'm missing something, but I'm pretty sure they didn't clarify that as well. I'm pretty sure Thawne just says, oh, I needed an arch nemesis, which is why I created one. That's all he said. They didn't really explain how exactly Barry becomes the Reverse Flash if he's dead. So I didn't really like how they didn't clarify that, and it is an issue I had with the episode. But Barry sees on the TV at Jitters that Damien and him, as the Reverse Flash, were working together, so that gives Barry the idea to essentially go find Damien Dark. So we then have Barry going to Damien Dark, and I really love the scene where he starts to impersonate a villain. It was a very well acted scene by Grant Gustin. But he says that after Damien was arrested, he fought the Flash, but before he could kill him, the Flash ran back in time, so he was the one who won. And I really loved Barry's acting over here, or Grant Gustin's acting over here. It was very well acted, and once again, I just love how Grant was able to pull off that villain persona, if you will. But Barry continues on to say that due to this timeline change, he lost his speed. We do also find out that there are multiple anachronisms, so the only way to essentially reset the timeline is to turn everything back at the same time using the PED, and that is obviously at Star Labs. Now while that's happening, Team Flash scanned for negative tachyons, but it's hard to find since they found out that Barry lost his speed, and due to that, negative tachyons have become harder to trace. We do also get this feel in regards to what type of a leader Thawne is, in which during this scene we do see him say things like, oh, try harder, and then he's able to come up with solutions much faster than Barry's ever able to do, because Thawne's just a much smarter character in general. So I thought that was a pretty cool scene as well. We do obviously then have this Thawne and Iris talk, in which Iris is beginning to have doubts because, you know, Barry called him the lightning rod, in which Thawne is the only one that would say this to Iris. So she starts getting suspicious over there, and they're obviously slowly setting Iris up into her realization, if you will. Now, again, these scenes I find pretty useless, but we have this Allegra and Alex talk where we find out that Chester and Allegra were essentially playing D&D one day around 10 years ago, and they decided to hook up. And in the morning, Allegra woke up and Chester was gone. I just found this storyline pretty useless. But later on in the episode, we find out that Chester went out to get blueberry muffins and coffee for them so they could obviously watch the sunrise. But when he got back, Allegra was gone. And Chester was going to tell her the truth, but they were attacked by the Legion of Doom. So he tried to tell her after that, but Allegra cut him off and told him that it was a mistake and that they're better off as friends. I found the storyline pretty useless. It was so unnecessary and it did not need to be here. But we then have Reverse Flash, Barry and Damien Dark arriving into Star Labs. We have Allegra and Alex getting knocked out. And then same thing for Ryan Choi and Chester as well. Ryan Choi and Chester are trying to locate negative tachyons, in which they're able to do. But Reverse Flash, Barry and Damien Dark are obviously able to knock them out. And Barry's able to find the PED in the secret compartment of the slot machine. And Cecile comes in with the Psycho Pirate mask, and we get this feel where, you know, Cecile has really grown with her powers and she's really evolved, and you do see how really powerful she is in this scene. But Damien's able to attack her and just knock her out. This is when Damien wants to kill Chester and Ryan Choi, but Barry quickly moves them back to the apartment, in which Damien begins to question why this happened, in which Damien's then able to put the pieces together, and he realizes that he isn't the Reverse Flash. Barry Allen is not the Reverse Flash. So Barry says that Thawne is the Reverse Flash and that he changed the timeline, so he's about to get erased from existence. So he needs Damien Dark's help, in which Damien questions why he should help him in the first place, in which Barry responds that in the original timeline, Nora Dark, which is his daughter, is still alive. And in that timeline, Damien actually sacrifices himself for her, in which, yeah, Damien then accepts their offer, if you will, and they work together to essentially restore the timeline. And he also uses his stone to see if Barry is lying, but Barry is not lying. But I really love the interactions between Damien Dark and Barry in these scenes. It was really great. I wish we could see more, but it's not going to happen because now the timeline's reset, meaning Damien Dark is now dead. But we then have this talk between Ryan Wilder as well as Iris in the loft, and Ryan says that Batwing from Gotham said that this two-faced villain showed up and that she has to go. And Ryan gives Iris this Velocity Zero gun that Luke, that being Batwoman, made when a certain lady in red tried to kill them all. I'd leave that up to you guys for you to theorize in regards to who this is, because I have no clue. But we find out that it's temporary and it disrupts the connection to whatever Speed Force Barry is connected to. Now Iris is trying to write her vows for her and obviously Eobard's wedding, but when Barry said that she is his lightning rod, it made her question what's actually going on, in which we then have Ryan Wilder pep talking Iris. And today, Ryan saved a kid living in a van near the waterfront. But as I said in the intro of this video, I really love the interactions between these characters, and I cannot wait to see more of this, established friendship back in 2021 in like the future Arrowverse crossovers. But we then head back to Barry and Damien Dark, in which Barry mentions that for this mission to work, he has to run Mach 20, in which Barry's not able to do that because he's obviously lost most of his speed. And Barry actually realizes that this is what actually causes Armageddon because of the pressure on the core of the Earth. So that was a pretty interesting reveal as well. But Barry essentially has 2 minutes to accelerate before he begins to destroy the world, and there's a 2% chance for him to speed up that fast in 2 minutes. So that does, add that intense element into this episode. But Damien then mentions that love, along with his speed, is what guides him through, and he's seen that Barry is a paragon of love through the time stone and has seen him rebirth the multiverse with love. This whole power of love thing I find really cheesy, and they should just stop with it. It's really annoying, it's really cheesy, and it's so unnecessary. They don't need to do this, but I guess it is what it is. But Allegra then tells Alex that she cut Chester off because everyone she's ever loved leaves her. Again, a pretty useless storyline for the episode. I didn't really care much about it. But Iris is in the loft, and Barry in normal clothes runs up behind her, and Iris pulls out her Velocity Zero gun, in which Iris sees that Barry is fading out of existence, and she questions what's happening. Barry's mentioning what happens, and then Thawne shows up in the Flash suit, and Thawne is trying to tell Iris to shoot Barry, because now in this timeline, Iris doesn't love Barry, she loves Thawne, but Barry tells Iris that he loves her, and then Iris shoots Thawne instead and lets Barry go. We then have Barry finding Damien Dark, in which Barry now has the PED on his chest, along with obviously his Reverse Flash suit. And Damien essentially uses magic so that Barry could hear him from anywhere, and they shake hands, and then Barry just begins to run. But we have Team Flash in the cortex of Star Labs, and they get news reports, and their scanners show that the world is basically getting destroyed. Volcanoes are erupting, forests are on fire, tornadoes are happening, and Allegra does also mention that she's tracking at least 100 earthquakes. So whatever Barry is doing is essentially destroying the whole world. So it is a very risky plan, but Barry is essentially trying to push through with the power of love so that he's actually able to prevail with his mission. But Alex and Ryan Choi go to help Frost and Chillblaine in the city, and essentially they're the ones who fight Damien Dark. We do know that John Constantine put the spell on Frost and Chillblaine so that Damien's magic cannot essentially, affect them. But yeah, Damien Dark gets defeated, and now he's reliant on Barry to prevail with this mission and for his daughter to come back. But Allegra and Chester then kiss, and then they say the I love you. Again, pretty useless. But Barry says that his plan isn't working and that he isn't able to run fast enough, in which Damien Dark tells Barry to focus, in which Thawne then begins to go chase Barry, and we see earthquakes and blowing up buildings in the city. And Barry sees the memories of his past events with Iris as he's running through the Speed Force, and the power of love he's using for Iris essentially allows him to push through and prevail with this plan of resetting the timeline. But obviously, as I said, Thawne is following after Barry, and Thawne's not going to let Barry prevail with resetting the timeline. So Thawne sticks his hand out to Barry to try and grab him, but he isn't able to. He's too slow, in which Barry enters the Speed Force and he's able to reset the timeline. I do really love the new CGI they added onto this chase scene and everything like that. It looks really cool, and it does kind of bring me back to those feels in like seasons 1 and 2 where they completely like blur out the background and we just see the speedsters running. I find that much better, and it did look really, really good in this scene. We then cut back to Central City 2021, in which Despero is looking for Barry by asking Team Flash for his location, and he's essentially torturing them. He has killed every one of Team Flash except for Cecile. None of them obviously knew where Barry was. And we have Despero about to kill Cecile, but the timeline is then reset. Everyone but Despero is erased and basically reset back to a different timeline, in which Barry then runs in with the Flash suit because he's back to being the Flash, not Reverse Flash, and he confronts Despero, and then he tells Despero that he causes Armageddon because he was trying to restore the timeline, and that the speedway caused by Thawne and Barry is what essentially caused the world to break and destroys the world. Despero senses that the timeline has been altered, but he doesn't know the true reason in regards to why. So Barry suggests that he goes to 2031 to see with his very own eyes, in which Despero agrees, but he will return. Despero then turns into his alien form and obviously threatens Barry by saying that if he sees any signs of, once again, this darker nature, he will return and kill Barry. And obviously he's going to do that because, as we see from the ending, Thawne is not stopping anywhere. He's still going to do what he wants to do. But Barry walks into the lounge and he reunites with Team Flash, and then it looks like Team Flash have no trace of memories about Armageddon whatsoever. It's like a whole new timeline has been written, in which that is pretty much the case. But Cecile senses that something is wrong with Barry, and Barry says that he will tell them later, and that's obviously to save screen time because it's unnecessary for Barry to tell everything because we've already seen what happens. But I love this scene a lot, where Barry just, gains all that hope back. He sees Iris, he just speeds and hugs her, and then he tells Team Flash like how much he loves them. I really love that. And then just like an icing on the cake with that, Iris calls Joe and Barry talks to him, in which Joe is obviously back to life. The timeline has been restored, and I absolutely loved this scene. It was really, really great. But then the episode ends with Eobard Thawne in the new Reverse Flash suit, and Tom Cavanagh looks great in that Reverse Flash suit as well. But he speeds into the time vault and he says, "No one uses time against me. I will live and I will change what's about to happen, and you will help me," as his eyes start to obviously turn red and as he starts phasing into that Reverse Flash form again. He's talking to Gideon. Now, I don't know if this is in present day or not, but if it's in present day, Gideon's obviously back because technically speaking, the whole Armageddon thing from episodes 1 to 3 have pretty much been erased. It pretty much didn't happen, which explains why Gideon is back. But overall, I really loved this episode. It's probably my second favorite episode of Armageddon. I really enjoyed this episode. I found a lot of elements really great about it. That being said, however, although I enjoyed it, this episode was the most problematic one out of all the other episodes, but the things I enjoyed were just really good. So because of that, it's still my second favorite episode of this whole Armageddon event. But overall, I will give this episode an 8.5 out of 10, and I cannot wait to see how this event comes to a close next week. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. If you guys have enjoyed the video, please give a like and subscribe. Be sure to tell me in the comment section down below what you guys thought about the episode. And yeah, I will see you guys in my next video.